welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 7. Going to start out with an interesting one here. Of course, all these cards are interesting. That's why I'm talking about them. This one is particularly unique, though, I think. Charmed Pendant, 4-mana artifact. Tap, mill a card, of course, is the new errated wording for this. For each colored mana symbol in the milled card's mana cost, add 1 mana of that color. Activate only as an instant. And the reminder text there is also relevant. It explains kind of what's going on here. For example, if the card's mana cost is 3 blue, blue, and a black, you add blue, blue, and a black. So you're going to add 3 mana and you are actually adding those colors, right? You're adding the exact pips that are on the card that has been milled. And I will point out, this is not a blue-black card, right? That is reminder text. And as we all know from Extort, reminder text is not included in the color identity of a card in the Commander format. This is a colorless card. It can go in any deck. Now, yes, I know people will say this card is terrible in what you actually want to be doing with it, which of course is, I want to be adding mana. It's essentially a mana rock. There are 2 places where I think this is actually pretty darn good. Place number 1, I'm in a self-mill deck, so I want to be milling myself anyway. Obviously, if you get a land or a artifact off the top with this, you will get no mana, but you want to mill yourself anyway, so that's not so bad. If you have some trigger, like on your Gitrog monster that says, whenever a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you're going to get a card draw off this, right? So if you have a deck where there's upside no matter what, there's not a lot of downside here. I also kind of like this in a deck where I am manipulating or looking at the top card of my library all the time, and you can end up getting 2-3 mana off this very easily. Again, if I'm already milling and I want to, and I can also add a bunch of mana with this, it can be pretty good. It's definitely a very fringe card that might be good in very specific situations. Next up, let's talk about Charisma. Blue, blue, blue. Enchantment Aura, so this would be a great card to mill off the top with that Charmed Pendant. It's an enchant creature. When enchanted creature deals damage to a creature, gain control of the other creature for as long as Charisma remains on the battlefield. So as long as this enchantment remains on the battlefield, you get to control that creature. So of course I attack with my creature, and if my opponent blocks, I get to gain control of their creature. Of course, if my creature dies in combat, then the Charisma will likely go away, so they'll just get their creature back. Still can be usable in those situations, but of course the situation where it is most usable is where you're dealing non-combat damage, right? This is a fantastic fit if you can throw non-combat damage around with your commander or maybe your other creatures. This most famously is just an absolute slam dunk in a Tabor and Lumia deck. If you're playing that deck, you probably already have it. If you've never seen that commander before, which I'm sure a lot of people have not, it is a commander I used to see from time to time in the format, and I never see it anymore. Of course, this is a slam dunk because that is a commander that is dealing damage to all creatures, and you will gain control of all creatures if your commander is enchanted with Charisma. So any creature dealing damage to other creatures in other forms, if you have a theme of doing that in your deck and you're in blue, this might be a great fit. Coming in at number 3, Chlorop Fant, green, 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 elemental 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Chlorop Fant. That's it. Just on my upkeep, I put a counter on this creature, so it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But if I also have Threshold, which means there's 7 or more cards in my graveyard, I get to put 2 counters on this guy on my upkeep. So that's it. Not really exciting. Just a great creature for putting counters on itself. And obviously, if you're in the +1/+1 counter theme, I think that's pretty good. A lot of commanders just want to see lots of counters on your creatures, or they want you to be putting counters on your creatures, right? So if you're in any of those themes where you just want lots of counters to be appearing on your creatures all the time, this is a pretty good include, I think. Coming in at number 4, Clout of the Dominus, a hybrid Izzet mana, so blue or red, but only costing 1 mana. Enchantment or enchant creature. Again, as long as enchanted creature is blue, it gets +1/+1 and has Shroud. As long as enchanted creature is red, it gets +1/+1 and has Haste. This seems really good, and I don't think I've ever seen it in a commander game before. Of course, it's got Shroud. A lot of people don't don't love that. If you're in some sort of Voltron-y strategy, I guess that's not great. But 1 mana, I give my blue-red creature haste, shroud, and +2/+2 seems pretty good. And of course, the big one here, I think the big one here is shroud, right? For 1 mana, I'm giving my blue commander shroud. That seems pretty good. Even in an Is It Spellslinger deck like Niv Mizzet Perun, why would I put that in there? I want to be playing instants and sorceries, right? Well, I don't know. 1 mana, I give my commander haste and shroud, so of course my opponents can't target it, and I don't really want to be targeting my commander with anything else either. And then it's also a 7/7 haste flying creature. Seems pretty good. If your commander is red and it wants to be attacking right away, this gives it haste. If it's blue and you don't want it to be targeted by anything, which of course a lot of situations are covered with that, you're going to give it shroud. It seems like a pretty easy include in a lot of decks if you either want to be protecting your commander or attacking with your commander, or both. Moving along, Cleansing Meditation. This is one that I just added to a deck of mine recently, and I will explain why. 1 white sorcery, destroy all enchantments. However, again with the threshold, if 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, instead destroy all enchantments, then return all cards in your graveyard this way to the battlefield. So essentially, you are destroying all enchantments except yours. And that's the significant part here. I recently put this in my Kellen deck because in my Kellen deck, I have a lot of really important enchantments, and that's where you want to be playing a card like this. I think very easily can achieve threshold in that deck as well, because my commander is sort of milling a little bit, and you really, really need to have enchantment removal in the commander format, of course. A lot of the most powerful cards in the format are enchantments. So this is 3 mana, essentially destroy all my opponent's enchantments, and I get to keep mine. Now, of course, also the wording here can be significant because you're actually destroying your enchantments and then bringing them back to play. That can be significant as well for whatever reason, but you could actually use it for something. But also if you're in an enchantment tribal deck, I think that's probably a good place for this. You got to destroy enchantments too in your enchantment tribal deck, right? You don't want to destroy yours. This could be a great fit there where you get your opponent's enchantments, but yours get returned to the battlefield. I really like Coffin Queen a lot. It is a card that could probably go in just about any commander deck and be good for you. 2 and a black, zombie wizard, 1/1. You may choose not to untap Coffin Queen during your untap step. Pay 2 and a black and tap it. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control when Coffin Queen becomes untapped, or you lose control of Coffin Queen. Exile that creature. This card is doing so much. First of all, it is a zombie and a wizard, so a very easy slot into any zombie or wizard tribal deck. This is obviously graveyard recursion. You can recur from anyone's graveyard. You can steal your opponent's creatures. Obviously, just getting big creatures out of your graveyard is super easy. If you're sick of that creature that you have put into play, you can let your Coffin Queen untap and then get something new. Or of course, if the creature you have recurred has died, you can let your Coffin Queen untap and get something new. Stealing creatures out of your opponent's graveyards means this fits in those I want to be playing my opponent's stuff commanders, which there are a bunch of those now. It also is graveyard hate, and this ability can be used at instant speed. So if you're playing against an opponent doing a recursion strategy, they go to reanimate their big scary creature out of the graveyard, instant speed. I pay 3 mana and steal it instead, fizzling that reanimate. And then of course that creature gets exiled when my Coffin Queen gets untapped, so they won't get it back. This card is doing so much. It seems like a lot of value for a 3 mana creature. You could put this in any commander deck, and I imagine it'll do a ton of work for you. Coming in at number 7, Cloud Cover. 2 white and a blue enchantment. Whenever another permanent you control becomes a target of spell or ability an opponent controls, you may return that permanent to owner's hand. Pretty simple. Just, I put this in play, and anytime anything of mine gets targeted, I have the option to return it to my hand if I want to. So of course, the obvious example here is my commander's in play, my opponent's about to swords it, and I could send it back to the command zone, I guess, or I could just put it back in my hand and avoid the commander tax, right? That seems pretty good. My opponent's about to destroy my Smothering Tithe, and I really want that because it's a really good card. I'll just put it back in my hand and replay it on the next turn. Like everything my opponents try to target, I can just put back in my hand if I want to. Even my lands, right? I have a really important land in play and my opponent ghost quarters it. Now they're targeting my land. That's a permanent I control being targeted by my opponent. I can just pick it up and play it again on the next turn. So this card seems pretty amazing. I almost never see it in the Commander format, and I think it could, again, probably go in any deck, and you're not going to be sad to see it. Just a really great way to be protecting your stuff. Coming in at number 8, Close Quarters. 2 red enchantment. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, Close Quarters deals 1 damage to any target. This is actually a really great card that I'm, again, surprised it doesn't see more play. And in particular, I like this in a theme because obviously it's red, where I'm just attacking with lots of little 1/1 creatures like a goblin deck. I think this is a fantastic fit in any goblin tribal theme because likely your creatures are already just 1/1s. You're swarming your opponents with them. And of course, they can just easily block. But if they do, now Close Quarters is going to deal 1 damage to any target. So you can just have that damage done directly to your opponent. I mean, you can throw the damage around, maybe kill some of their creatures, but what this becomes in one of those decks, like a Goblin Tribal deck, is your opponents just really don't have an option. If they want to block, they can. I guess it will kill your Goblin likely, but they're still going to take the damage. You can sort of bypass the blocking. I guess in a lot of ways it can be double duty here because if they're blocking with 1/1 creatures, you're going to kill their 1/1 creatures and also do the damage to them. So that's a real lose-lose situation for your opponents. It just seems like great value in a deck where you are attacking a lot with 1/1 creatures. I mean, in any deck where you're attacking a lot all around, it's pretty good, but especially if you're doing it with little creatures. All right, let's talk about cleansing. Hear me out, people. I know, why would I recommend a card like this? Hear me out. I'm going to make a case for it. And in fact, this again is a card that I actually have in one of my decks. White sorcery. For each land, destroy that land. Oh my goodness, mass land destruction. Demo, how dare you recommend that in the Commander format? But unless any player pays 1 life. The wording on this card is really funny because, of course, you're destroying all the lands unless players pay life for them, but any player can pay the life, so your opponent can choose to save your lands if they want to. I don't think they would ever do that. Essentially what this is, because of course everyone's going to pay the life, this sort of turns into a price of progress type of situation, which is why I ended up putting it in my lands deck, because that's a deck where I want less lands in play, and this almost becomes sort of a win con, right? Later in the game, I cast this and I got like 4 lands in play. My opponents have like 10. So now they're going to essentially just lose 10 life, right? I guess they could let some of their lands go, but that's good too. There's really no downside to this card. So this can be, I just have my opponents lose a ton of life, or I have them essentially sacrifice a bunch of their lands. It's all upside. And for all the people complaining that how dare you play mass land destruction in the Commander format, you just pay the life, right? If you don't want your lands destroyed, just pay the life. I have no problem with a card like this in a Commander game at all, and I think it's pretty good in those unique situations. All right, ending off this time at number 10 with Choice of Damnations, and this is a card they have mentioned before on my channel, and every single time I mention this card, I have people in the comments telling me why it's not very good. And the reason why is because they are interpreting this card wrong. So after I read it, I will try to explain it to the best of my abilities so that we understand exactly what's happening here. It can be a little confusing. So 5 and a black sorcery arcane, target opponent chooses a number. So you're going to cast this, you're going to choose an opponent, and they're going to choose a number. You may have that player lose that much life. If you don't, that player sacrifices all but that many permanents. So what people will often say when I recommend this card is, that card's terrible, your opponent is just going to choose 0. Okay, so since I get to choose the result here, I'll choose that player sacrifices all but that many permanents. So that means that player is sacrificing all their permanents because they're sacrificing all but 0 permanents. That's how this card works, right? There is no good choice here for your opponent. That's why it's called Choice of Damnations. It is a very fantastically flavored card. This is a fantastic card against an opponent later in the game. I know people say 6 mana, that's kind of a lot. Yeah, but you want to cast this later in the game. That's when the choice really gets difficult for your opponent, right? Let's say they have 12 permanents in play. What number are they going to choose? If they choose 6, that means I can either have them lose 6 life or they sacrifice all but 6 permanents. That means they have to sacrifice half their permanents. That is really devastating for someone. The more stuff your opponents have in play, the worse this gets for them. And if they have 20 permanents in play, what number are they going to choose? And again, remember, it's later in the game and likely their life total is low. And also remember, I get to choose the outcome. They choose the number, but I choose the outcome. So are they going to choose 20 so they get to keep all their permanents? Okay, I'll just choose you lose 20 life. 6 mana, my opponent loses 20 life. That's pretty good too, right? That probably will put them close to death. This card is extra good if you are in themes where it fits. I know this fits every theme, right? Having your opponent sacrifice permanents or lose life, but there are actually commanders that want our opponents to be losing life. You get a benefit out of it. And there are also, of course, a lot of decks out there where we want our opponents to be sacrificing permanents, right? If I have a Mayhem Devil in play and my opponent sacrifices half their permanents, I also get a bunch of Mayhem Devil triggers as well, right? So it is just a great card for punishing a guy in a commander game, and then also actually does fit certain themes. That is it. That is all 10 more cards that I think you guys should be putting in your commander decks. Let me know in the comments below if you are going to be adding any of these cards to your decks. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.